Today I'm excited to review for you The Cemetery of Untold Stories by Julia Alvarez. Alma has decided that her very successful literary career is done. She's done telling stories, and she wants to put the stories that are unfinished to rest. The opportunity arises when she inherits a plot of land back in the Dominican Republic. There with her sculptor friend Brava, she creates a cemetery that confuses the locals at first because they don't really understand that she's just trying to bury stories there. A lot of the stories she burns and then buries, but there are two stories that she leaves complete and just buries whole. And that is the story of her father and the ex wife of the dictator Trujillo, otherwise known as El Jefe. Alma enlists the help of one of her neighbors, Filomena, to start taking care of the cemetery. And that's when the markers that have been created by Alma's sculptor friend Brava start speaking to Filomena and start telling their stories. I'm going to change things up and talk about the prose and style of this book first. It's beautifully written. There are so many passages that I could quote, that I want to jot down. There's just a lot of beautiful writing here. The style of this book is really interesting. There aren't traditional chapters, they're more like section breaks. And then the book is further broken up by parts, basically. So within those parts, you really kind of go from perspective to perspective, I guess is the best way to put it. But what's really cool about it is it interweaves the stories of Alma and her sisters, and Philomena and her sister, and the tale of the dictator's ex wife. She's basically been erased from history, and the tale of Alma's father, Manuel. I think it's really effective. It lends sort of a mercurial effect to the book where you sort of slide from one story to the next. And it really helps, I think, create this feeling of connection between these different stories because what ultimately this book is about, and when we start talking about plot, it's really, yes, about, Alma moving to the Dominican Republic, back to where she was born, to lay these stories to rest. But beyond that, it really is the story of stories, not just the stories that are told with intention, but the stories we tell each other, the stories that are passed down. One of the interesting examples of that is you have multiple characters who are basically told a story of El Jefe, of the dictatorship. On one hand, for Philomena, her father thought he was a strong man, the kind of man the country needed. And Manuel would have a very different opinion. That's Alma's father. So it's interesting to see how that interweaves with everything. And that's really kind of what you're getting for the plot. There's some very interesting stuff going on with Philomena's sister and Philomena's life. So it's a very intriguing sort of cross pollination of the very personal kind of story and this broader, bigger story for the Dominican Republic and how they were affected by this dictatorship. So it really kind of examines sort of the macro level and the micro level at the same time, which is really fascinating. This is a pretty short book, just a little over a couple hundred pages, but you are introduced to some very memorable, very interesting characters. We have Alma herself, who is an interesting character in that she sets up this cemetery and kind of begins the story. And she certainly has her own story and her own struggles as an artist, as a writer, as a sister, as a daughter. That's all there and present. But you also kind of get this sense that she is sort of manipulating the lives around her, not in a bad way, but she is setting things out and setting things up so that other people can connect with these stories or tell their stories. Philomena is fascinating. She's an absolutely fascinating character that has had this remarkable, rough life. And her approach, though, to life and her ability to just keep moving forward and her capacity for empathy and forgiveness is really striking. There's Philomena's sister, Perla, whose story goes in a very unexpected direction. And then there are the stories that went unfinished. We have two different books by Alma. There's the story of her father, who had created this sort of magical land with his mother as a child as a means of escaping the abuse of his father. And then you have the tale of Bienvenida, who is the ex-wife of the dictator Trujillo, who basically gets erased by the next woman that comes along and has been lost to time, as has her story. And all of this creates this beautiful collage of all these different kinds of stories that are lost or untold. And sometimes that's because those stories have been erased, like they were told at one point, but they have been willfully held back. Some of them are stories that are too painful to share. Some of them are stories that are too incomplete to share. And it starts to look into the reasons behind that, why someone keeps something hidden or why they keep parts of themselves hidden from even the people that they are the closest to. It also explores the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Overall, I really love the story. I would give this 5 stars out of 5. I really love the way, as historical fiction, it was able to take the big ideas and the big struggles of the Dominican Republic and contrast that and play off of it in these very personal stories that are told throughout this book. I would 100% recommend The Cemetery of Untold Stories.